Chapter 1. The Inheritance Nobody Wanted. Rain still clung to the cemetery grass when Eleanor followed the last mourners away from her grandfather's grave. The quiet dignity of the funeral vanished the moment the family entered the lawyer's office. Whispered condolences became impatient sighs, and sorrow gave way to expectation. Everyone knew Arthur Bennett had lived simply, but rumors insisted he had quietly accumulated a remarkable fortune over decades of masterful woodworking. His eldest son adjusted his expensive watch while his daughter argued over which property should be sold first. Grandchildren exchanged nervous glances, already calculating what their shares might buy. Before the lawyer unfolded the will, accusations surfaced. Someone claimed Arthur had promised them the lake house. Another insisted the investment accounts belonged to them by right. Old resentments, buried for years, returned with startling force. Eleanor remained silent near the window. She remembered her grandfather differently. She remembered rough hands guiding hers across polished oak, the scent of cedar filling the workshop, and evenings spent listening to stories instead of discussing money. She wondered whether anyone else missed the man himself. Finally, the lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. Savings, investments, and properties were carefully divided among Arthur's children. Relief spread across the room. Smiles appeared. Arguments softened into satisfied murmurs. Then came the final page. To my granddaughter, Eleanor Bennett, I leave my woodworking workshop on Mill Road, together with everything inside. Silence lasted only a heartbeat before laughter erupted. The old shed, someone scoffed. That place should have been demolished years ago, another added. Even Eleanor blinked in surprise. She had expected nothing at all. Yet somehow this felt strangely deliberate. The lawyer slid a small ring of worn brass keys across the polished desk. They rested before her like an ordinary afterthought. While her relatives celebrated bank accounts, deeds, and valuable assets, Eleanor closed her fingers around the cold keys without complaint. She ignored their mocking smiles, thanked the lawyer quietly, and walked from the office carrying the inheritance nobody wanted, never imagining those forgotten keys were opening the first door to an extraordinary destiny. Chapter 2. A Place Frozen in Time. Eleanor drove to Mill Road 2 days later. The narrow lane ended beneath towering maples where the weathered workshop stood exactly as she remembered it, only quieter. Sunlight slipped through cracked windows, revealing drifting dust that danced like forgotten memories. She pushed the old door open. It answered with the familiar groan she hadn't heard since childhood. The comforting scent of cedar, pine, and aged varnish wrapped around her instantly. Every workbench remained in its place. Worn chisels, wooden planes, and carefully sharpened carving tools waited as though Arthur had simply stepped outside for a moment. Half-finished chairs rested beneath white sheets. Faded sketches covered one wall, their pencil lines softened by time. A cracked mug still held dried paintbrushes. Eleanor brushed her fingertips across the smooth oak tabletop where her grandfather had patiently taught her how to follow the grain instead of forcing the wood. She could almost hear his gentle voice reminding her that every piece carried its own story. Her phone buzzed. It was her uncle. Without greeting, he offered to buy the workshop immediately. It's only an old building, he insisted. Take the money before it falls apart. Eleanor looked around once more. Nothing here felt abandoned. It felt protected. Someone had dusted nothing, yet everything seemed carefully preserved by time itself. In one corner stood an unfinished cabinet with a cloth folded neatly across its top, instead of scattered carelessly. A calendar remained open to the same month from years before. Beside it rested Arthur's reading glasses, perfectly aligned with a leather notebook, as though he had expected to return before sunset. She slipped the phone into her pocket without answering. Whatever this place contained, it deserved patience instead of profit. As she prepared to leave, a faint carving beneath the nearest bench caught her eye, almost invisible beneath decades of dust, silently promising the workshop still guarded secrets waiting for only one person to discover. Chapter 3. The First Hidden Clue. The next morning, Eleanor returned carrying little more than cleaning supplies, work gloves, and quiet determination. She swept away years of dust one careful stroke at a time, revealing the rich colors hidden beneath forgotten layers of neglect. Every polished surface seemed to whisper fragments of the life her grandfather had built inside these walls. As she knelt beside the oldest workbench, her cloth caught against a shallow groove carved into the wood. She brushed away the remaining dust and froze. It was a tiny symbol shaped like an intertwined oak leaf and compass, etched so precisely it could never have been accidental. Her breath caught. She had seen it before. When she was 8 years old, Arthur had absent-mindedly sketched the same strange emblem onto scraps of paper while telling stories about patience and craftsmanship. Whenever she asked what it meant, he would simply smile and say, "Some doors should only open for the right hands." Her pulse quickened. She examined the carving more closely and noticed faint scratches leading toward the back of the workbench. Running her fingers along the wooden frame, she felt one plank shift beneath gentle pressure. A hidden panel. It slid aside with a soft click, revealing a narrow compartment untouched by time. Inside rested a beautifully handcrafted wooden box no larger than a jewelry case. Its surface displayed intricate geometric patterns that flowed seamlessly across every side, leaving no visible hinges, lock, or opening. It was less a container than a puzzle waiting to be understood. Eleanor turned it over repeatedly until her thumb settled upon a tiny carved oak leaf that matched the symbol beneath the bench. She pressed gently. A quiet mechanism stirred inside. The lid lifted only enough to reveal a single folded piece of yellowed paper. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. In Arthur's unmistakable handwriting were just 11 words. The first lesson was never here. Follow where the sunlight refuses to stay. She read the sentence again, searching for meaning, but the workshop offered only silence. Somewhere within those familiar walls, another secret was already waiting, and for the first time, Eleanor realized her grandfather had never truly left her behind. Chapter 4. The Grandfather's Secret Life. Arthur's cryptic message lingered in Eleanor's thoughts long after she folded the note and slipped it safely into her pocket. She spent hours watching how sunlight moved across the workshop, until late afternoon revealed what morning had concealed. As the fading light shifted toward the western wall, one narrow corner remained strangely untouched, hidden beneath the shadow of a towering oak outside. Curious, she examined an old bookcase standing against the wall. At first glance it seemed ordinary, but one shelf sat slightly deeper than the others. Pressing it gently, she heard a soft click. The entire back panel swung inward. Inside lay several leather-bound journals, bundles of carefully tied letters, faded photographs, and brittle newspaper clippings that had never been meant for curious eyes. She opened the oldest journal. Its pages described years of painstaking restoration work on antique furniture, centuries-old sculptures, and priceless historical relics entrusted to Arthur by museums, churches, and private collectors. Every repair was documented with remarkable precision, yet nowhere did he mention accepting public recognition. Newspaper photographs confirmed his work, but another expert's name appeared beneath every headline. Arthur had chosen to remain invisible. As Eleanor turned another page, the tone changed. The careful handwriting grew tense. He wrote about one extraordinary commission, unlike any before it. A mysterious artifact had arrived damaged beyond recognition, accompanied by strict instructions and unusual secrecy. Its historical importance was immeasurable, but restoring it had uncovered something no one expected. Another journal revealed disturbing entries. Someone had learned what Arthur possessed. His workshop had been broken into years earlier. Tools were scattered, cabinets searched, and unfinished projects destroyed, yet nothing valuable was taken. Whoever entered had been searching for only one thing. The final photograph showed Arthur standing beside a large object hidden beneath a heavy canvas sheet. Across the back, he had written a single sentence. "If anyone reads this, I pray they value truth more than fortune." Eleanor looked around the silent workshop with new eyes. The building no longer felt like an abandoned workplace. It felt like a carefully guarded vault, and somewhere within its aging walls remained the unfinished project that had frightened her grandfather enough to hide it from the entire world. Chapter 5. Shadows Begin Watching. Eleanor tried to keep her discoveries private, but small towns had a way of turning whispers into headlines. Within days, neighbors noticed fresh lights glowing inside the abandoned workshop each evening. The old building that had been ignored for years suddenly became the subject of quiet conversations in cafes, hardware stores, and church parking lots. Before long, people began asking why Arthur's granddaughter was spending so much time inside a place everyone else had considered worthless. Then the strangers appeared. The first was a black sedan parked across the road. It remained there for nearly an hour before driving away without anyone stepping out. The next afternoon, a different vehicle passed the workshop 3 times, slowing each time its driver glanced toward the windows. Eleanor told herself it was coincidence, yet the uneasy feeling refused to leave. The phone calls followed. Unknown voices politely offered to purchase the workshop immediately, promising generous cash payments without asking a single question about its condition. When she declined, the callers ended the conversations abruptly, never giving their names. One morning she unlocked the front door and stopped cold. A favorite carving chisel was missing from its place on the workbench. Nothing else had been disturbed, yet faint muddy footprints crossed the wooden floor before disappearing near the rear wall. Someone had entered the workshop during the night. Even more unsettling was her family's sudden change of heart. The same relatives who had laughed at her inheritance now arrived with forced smiles and convenient excuses. Her uncle offered to help organize the building. A cousin insisted they should search together in case Arthur had forgotten something valuable. Their curiosity felt rehearsed rather than genuine. That evening, Eleanor carefully locked every door before leaving. Halfway down the road, she glanced into the rearview mirror. A lone figure stood silently beside the workshop, watching the building instead of entering it. By the time she turned the car around, the stranger had vanished, leaving only deep footprints in the damp earth and the growing certainty that someone else believed Arthur's greatest secret was still hidden inside those weathered walls. Chapter 6. The family turns against her. The tension that had simmered beneath polite conversations finally erupted the following weekend. Eleanor's relatives arrived at the workshop together. Their expensive cars lined along the narrow road like an uninvited procession. None of them had come to remember Arthur. They had come looking for whatever they believed she was hiding. Her eldest uncle stepped forward first, forcing a smile that never reached his eyes. "We've been thinking," he began. "Grandfather must have left something valuable here. It isn't fair if only you get to keep it." Before Eleanor could answer, accusations flew from every direction. A cousin insisted neighbors had seen mysterious visitors. Her aunt claimed the sudden interest in the workshop proved Arthur had concealed money inside its walls. Someone even suggested Eleanor had already found cash and secretly moved it elsewhere. Their voices echoed through the building that Arthur had once filled with quiet patience. The lawyer's name was mentioned repeatedly. Several relatives threatened to challenge the will, arguing that the inheritance had been divided under false assumptions. They demanded complete access to search every cabinet, every drawer, and every hidden corner. Eleanor stood her ground. "This workshop was his choice," she said calmly. "If he wanted anyone else here, he would have written it." Her words only deepened their anger. Years of buried resentment poured into the open. Old arguments over forgotten birthdays, unpaid loans, and childhood favoritism resurfaced with painful clarity. Arthur's passing had not created the division. It had merely uncovered wounds that had never healed. When they finally left, the silence felt heavier than their shouting. Eleanor locked the workshop door and leaned against it, fighting the loneliness creeping into her heart. For a brief moment, she questioned whether keeping the building was worth losing what remained of her family. Then she unfolded Arthur's handwritten note once more. The first lesson was never here. She read the words until her breathing steadied. Whatever secret her grandfather had protected for so many years, it was never about money. Deep within the workshop, another clue waited patiently, and Eleanor knew abandoning the search now would mean abandoning the man who had always believed in her when no one else did. Chapter 7. The Final Puzzle. With the workshop finally quiet again, Eleanor devoted herself completely to Arthur's trail of hidden clues. She stopped searching for obvious answers and began seeing the room through her grandfather's eyes. Every cabinet, every table, and every carefully crafted chair became more than furniture. They became pieces of a story he had spent decades preparing for someone patient enough to understand. The first discovery came inside the unfinished cabinet she had noticed days earlier. A concealed drawer opened only after she aligned its wooden grain with a carved compass symbol. Inside rested a small brass gear and another handwritten message. Craftsmanship begins where shortcuts end. She smiled despite the growing tension. Arthur had repeated those words countless times whenever she became frustrated as a child. The brass gear fit perfectly into a hidden mechanism inside an antique grandfather clock standing in the corner. As its silent gears turned for the first time in years, a narrow compartment slid open, revealing a carved wooden triangle marked with the familiar oak leaf emblem. Each puzzle led naturally to the next. A false book spine unlocked a hidden shelf. A carefully balanced drawer released a concealed latch. An ordinary-looking stool concealed a rotating base that pointed toward the center of the workshop whenever it was positioned correctly. Hours stretched into evening before every collected piece finally formed a complete design across Arthur's old drafting table. The pattern resembled the floor itself. Her heartbeat quickened as she measured the wooden planks beneath her feet. One section near the center was slightly thicker than the others. Kneeling carefully, she brushed away years of dust and discovered a nearly invisible circular seam surrounding an iron ring hidden beneath the boards. She pulled gently. Nothing happened. Then she noticed several empty recesses carved around the ring, each shaped to match the wooden puzzle pieces she had gathered throughout the workshop. Arthur had designed one final challenge. This door would never respond to force. It demanded patience, precision, and trust in every lesson he had ever taught her. As Eleanor carefully arranged the carved pieces into their matching places, a deep metallic click echoed beneath the floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of ancient mechanisms slowly awakening after decades of perfect silence. Chapter 8. The Greatest Treasure Revealed. The final click echoed through the workshop, followed by a low rumble beneath Eleanor's feet. Dust drifted from the ceiling as the wooden floor slowly separated along the circular seam. Inch by inch, a hidden platform descended, revealing a narrow stone staircase that disappeared into darkness. Cool air, untouched for decades, rose from below carrying the faint scent of aged paper, cedar, and iron. Heart pounding, Eleanor switched on a lantern from the workbench and carefully descended. The chamber beneath the workshop was larger than she had imagined. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each covered with protective cloths and sealed wooden crates bearing handwritten labels in Arthur's unmistakable script. Everything had been arranged with remarkable precision, as though he had expected someone to arrive one day and continue exactly where he had left off. She lifted the cloth from the nearest table. Instead of gold or jewels, she found dozens of rolled master blueprints secured with wax seals. They detailed the restoration of castles, cathedrals, antique clocks, ceremonial furniture, and priceless sculptures spanning centuries of history. Every drawing included meticulous notes, measurements, and restoration techniques unavailable anywhere else. Nearby stood glass cabinets containing beautifully restored historical artifacts. Intricately carved religious icons, ancient musical instruments, rare handcrafted chests, and delicate wooden sculptures rested safely behind protective panels. Each piece carried a numbered tag connected to a thick ledger identifying its rightful owner, historical origin, and the circumstances that had prevented its return. Arthur had never collected treasures for himself. He had protected them until they could safely go home. Eleanor opened another leather journal. Its pages documented decades of investigations, correspondence with historians, museum curators, and legal experts. Arthur had uncovered stolen artifacts, corrected false ownership claims, and quietly restored pieces that corrupt collectors hoped would disappear forever. Every decision reflected extraordinary patience, integrity, and respect for history rather than profit. Finally, she unlocked a heavy oak chest positioned in the center of the chamber. Inside rested notarized legal documents, authenticated certificates, ownership records, and letters from museums thanking an unnamed conservator for preserving irreplaceable cultural heritage. Independent appraisals valued the entire collection in the tens of millions, yet every page emphasized the same truth. Its historical importance could never be measured by money alone. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she looked around the silent chamber. Her grandfather had not hidden a fortune because he feared thieves would steal his wealth. He had hidden humanity's forgotten stories because he feared greed would erase them forever. In that moment, she finally understood why Arthur had entrusted the workshop and everything beneath it to the only person he believed would protect the legacy instead of selling it. Chapter 9. The Race to Protect the Legacy. Eleanor knew the secret could not remain hidden forever. Before touching another artifact, she photographed every document, sealed the chamber exactly as she had found it, and contacted the lawyer who had read Arthur's will. Within hours, the quiet discovery beneath the workshop became the beginning of a battle her grandfather had anticipated years earlier. The lawyer arrived with 2 respected historians and an investigator specializing in stolen cultural property. As they examined Arthur's journals, their expressions shifted from professional curiosity to astonishment. The collection matched descriptions of priceless artifacts that experts had spent decades trying to locate. Arthur had preserved them in absolute secrecy while building an irrefutable record proving where each piece truly belonged. News traveled faster than anyone expected. By the following morning, reporters gathered outside the workshop. That same night, masked intruders cut the power and forced open a side window. They searched frantically through the building, but never reached the hidden chamber. Eleanor, alerted by the newly installed security system, watched police arrive just in time to chase the thieves into the darkness. Though they escaped, they left behind sophisticated tools that proved this was no ordinary burglary. Her relatives wasted no time. They filed legal claims insisting the workshop's contents should be divided among the family. Suddenly, those who had mocked the dusty building described it as the most valuable part of Arthur's estate. They argued he could never have intended one granddaughter to inherit such extraordinary wealth. Arthur had prepared for that argument too. Hidden within the final journal was a sealed letter addressed specifically to the court. In calm, unmistakable handwriting, he explained that every clue, every puzzle, and every safeguard had been designed for Eleanor alone. She had been the only family member who visited without asking for money, the only one who listened to his stories, and the only one who understood that craftsmanship served history rather than fortune. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the court rejected every challenge. As investigators began returning the artifacts to their rightful institutions, Eleanor realized the greatest victory was never winning ownership. It was fulfilling Arthur's final promise. He had trusted one compassionate heart over countless eager hands, believing that character, not inheritance, determined who deserved to become the guardian of history. Chapter 10. Justice Finds Its Way. The courtroom fell silent as the judge set the final document onto the bench. Weeks of testimony, expert analysis, and painstaking investigation had led to a single undeniable conclusion. Arthur Bennett had planned every detail of his legacy with extraordinary care. The workshop, the hidden chamber, the puzzles, and the collection beneath it had never been an accident. They had always been intended for Eleanor, and the law would honor his wishes exactly as he had written them. One by one, the family's challenges collapsed. The journals established Arthur's intentions beyond question. The lawyer confirmed the authenticity of every page. Historians verified the significance of the collection, while investigators demonstrated that Arthur had acted as a guardian rather than an owner. There was no hidden fortune stolen from the family, only a carefully protected legacy entrusted to the one person capable of preserving it. Outside the courthouse, Eleanor watched her relatives leave without celebration. The money they had fought over so fiercely had already begun disappearing. Taxes consumed large portions of the estate. Risky investments failed. The lake house was sold to settle mounting debts, and years of resentment remained long after the wealth had faded. In chasing immediate rewards, they had overlooked the only inheritance that could never lose its value. Eleanor chose a different path. She refused every private offer to purchase the artifacts or the restoration records, even when the figures reached astonishing amounts. Instead, she worked alongside museums, historians, and cultural organizations to return each piece to its rightful home, exactly as Arthur had intended. News outlets praised her integrity, calling her the unexpected guardian of a remarkable historical legacy rather than the owner of a priceless collection. Standing once again inside the quiet workshop, she looked at the worn tools hanging exactly where her grandfather had left them. For the first time, The room no longer felt heavy with secrets. It felt peaceful. Arthur had spent his life proving that true craftsmanship restored more than broken wood. Through patience, honesty, and unwavering conviction, he had restored forgotten history, protected priceless treasures, and, in the end, shaped the character of the granddaughter who would carry his life's work forward long after his own hands had fallen still. Chapter 11. The Workshop Lives Again. Months later, the once-forgotten workshop stood open once again, its weathered walls carefully restored without erasing the character Arthur had loved. What neighbors once dismissed as a crumbling shed had become the Bennett Restoration Center, where visitors arrived each day to witness forgotten craftsmanship brought back to life. Children wandered through the exhibition rooms, studying photographs of rescued artifacts and reading Arthur's journals displayed beside the tools he had once held. Glass cases preserved his original sketches, while interactive workshops invited aspiring artisans to learn the same careful techniques that had protected history for generations. Eleanor refused to place herself at the center of the story. Every morning she welcomed apprentices into the old workshop, handing them more notebooks filled with Arthur's handwritten lessons. Instead of beginning with advanced carving, she taught patience, observation, and respect for every piece of wood. "Listen before you shape," she would say, repeating the words her grandfather had spoken countless times. The restored building soon became the town's greatest source of pride. Local schools organized visits. Museums partnered with the Center on Preservation projects. Experienced craftspeople volunteered beside eager beginners, creating a community united by purpose instead of profit. One quiet evening, Eleanor closed the workshop doors and paused beside Arthur's favorite workbench. The scent of cedar filled the air exactly as it had on the day she first opened the forgotten door. She smiled, placed her hand upon the smooth oak, and whispered, "You were right, Grandpa." The greatest treasure was never hidden beneath the floor. It was the wisdom to protect what others failed to value. Outside, evening sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating sawdust that shimmered like golden memories. The laughter of young apprentices drifted across the courtyard, carrying Arthur's legacy into every future pair of hands willing to build with heart. Chapter 12. The True Measure of Wealth. As sunlight streamed through the restored workshop windows, Eleanor carefully sanded the final piece of unfinished oak. It was the last project Arthur Bennett had never completed, a simple rocking chair he once promised would become the finest thing my hands will ever leave. She traced the familiar tool marks across its frame and smiled. For the first time since his passing, there was nothing left to uncover, defend, or prove. Every secret had found its rightful place. Every artifact had returned home, and every lesson continued through lives willing to learn. Around her, young apprentices shaped fresh pieces of wood with patient hands. Their conversations blended with the steady rhythm of planes, chisels, and quiet laughter. The workshop no longer echoed with suspicion or greed. It breathed with purpose. People often asked Eleanor whether she regretted refusing the fortune collectors had offered for the hidden collection. She always answered the same way. Wealth could purchase comfort, but it could never replace trust, restore history, or inspire another generation to protect what mattered most. Arthur's greatest inheritance had never been the chamber, the documents, or the priceless artifacts. It was the courage to choose integrity when greed promised an easier path. As the finished chair caught the warm afternoon light, Eleanor gently placed it beside her grandfather's empty workbench. She imagined him smiling with quiet satisfaction, knowing his final masterpiece had never been crafted from wood alone. It had been built from kindness, patience, unwavering honesty, and faith that goodness would outlive greed. Beyond the windows, families gathered, children laughed, and the workshop welcomed another generation through its open doors. Some inherit fortunes that disappear. Others inherit values that shape countless lives. In the end, cash changes hands, but character changes history. And the greatest treasure will always belong to those courageous enough to protect a legacy with love instead of possessing it with greed.